I want to talk now about some growth levers. So you mentioned this before with kind of Charles Tyrwhitt and how you initially go after kind of branded terms and then you'd go after the kind of wider demand. When you first take on a brand, what kind of quick wins do you look for? And then, yeah, are there kind of more longer term plays that you'd also look at trying to
Yeah,
roll out?
no, 100%. So I'd always break that down into what I would refer to as operational and kind of structural things. And the operational pieces is everything on the Amazon platform. So all of the more digital marketing principles. And then structural is everything kind of running the business as a whole. And I would say operational wins are the quickest. If I would spend a day working in a PPC console, I would notice the difference in performance tomorrow. Not necessarily me, but anyone doing that. Likewise, if you were to move a price point on a listing on Amazon, you would notice the difference in your sales and margin the next day. Likewise, if you were to change a header image, you'd notice a difference if it was significant enough. If you were to change the copy in a title or bullet point or something of that ilk, these things are really immediate and it's live publishing, and therefore if you change something today and you're being put in front of a million eyeballs on a daily basis as a leading product, these 0.5% deltas in performance on any click-through rate, conversion rate, impressions make a huge difference. The average click-through rate across our portfolio is about 1 to 1.5%. If you just move that by half a percentage point, an extra one person in 200 clicks on this listing that looks at it, you increase your sales by 50 to 33%. So all else being equal in the rest of the funnel. So those operational wins are imperative for quick, low-hanging fruit. And running any kind of operational analysis, the first thing I'd look at is those three metrics I spoke about earlier. So the number of impressions that the listing's getting relative to the competitors in the market, the click-through rate relative to Amazon averages, but also making some accommodation for the category that we sit in. And then same again for the conversion rate. If you're selling sellotape on Amazon, your conversion rate's going to be a lot higher because it's quite commoditized. People know what they're looking at and they're not going to change their minds once they've clicked on it. If it's sellotape and it looks like sellotape and it is sellotape, they'll probably buy it. If you're selling sunglasses, people might do a lot more window shopping. So there's a natural accommodation for lower conversion rates. But pretty much for every product that a brand is selling, we're going to need to benchmark what are the impressions that it's getting, where's the click-through rate for each, where's the conversion rate for each. If you've got a really strong conversion rate across a listing, then you can really scale that through the advertising console. You can't scale a bad converting listing. Reason being is that Amazon's fully operating around a pay-per-click sponsored model. So you're paying every time someone clicks on your listing. Therefore, the less times you have to pay for that click per conversion, the higher margin you're going to be and the less you have to spend on advertising. If you've got a product that's converting at 5% and the amount that you spend for every click on your listing is £1, you have to spend £20 per sale on the sponsored side. If your conversion rate's 25%, which is very doable, then you pay £4 per sale. So first and foremost, before going spending money and scaling, you've got to make sure you've got a listing that converts well. That's done across branding refreshes, that's done across the way that the listing speaks to the consumer, as well as the kind of SEO that's kind of backed up within that and communicating with Amazon's algorithm. How's your price point relative to kind of the value that you're offering through that product? All of these things, the fulfillment method, you've got to make sure you're on Prime if you're selling on Amazon, really, if you want to convert well. People expect their next day delivery and they expect it to be free. So ticking all of those boxes and making sure we've got conversion rate that scales well. Then once you've done that across the board, you can really hit the scale button by going wider on the advertising. And again, to break that down into a little bit more detail, you can go wider by targeting more keywords, more products and competitors, or likewise more audiences. And also you can afford to spend more per click if you've got a higher conversion rate rather than scrimping and saving on the amount that you're spending per click with a lower conversion rate. So again, you'd split that catalog out. How do we marry up? If we've got strong converting products, can we go further and wider with advertising? If we've got a poorly converting product, okay, how do we convert that better before we spend any money is kind of the bread and butter. They're your quick wins. that you can figure out in a day, put together a plan for, and execute within the first kind of 1 to 3 months. There's a lot of trial and error, basically a series of A/B testing across those planes until you move those metrics to where you want them to be. And then there's diminishing returns across, how much you can really level up the same listings conversion rates. From the first 3 months of A/B testing, you might get it from 10 to 20%. From the next 3 months, you'll do well to get it from 20 to 25, and so on and so forth. So once you've then got your listings hitting the impressions and kind of representing the demands that exists. Again, you can't really move the demand, but you want to be ranking well for all the keywords that represent demand for your product. And you've got strong click-through and conversion rates thereafter. The name of the game is to turn to the structural pieces. And that is either launch new products or launch new marketplaces. So we often inherit Amazon businesses, UK only. Brilliant. First step is to go and do all of that across the operational piece. And that in itself can be anywhere from a 3-month job to a 12-month job. Depends on the size of the catalog, but ultimately a series of A/B testing to get that right. Then once we're kind of hitting that apex of the diminishing marginal returns curve, what we really need to do is start thinking about what's the next thing that's going to push this brand forward. That could be an European expansion, that could be a US expansion, that could be launching a new product altogether. If you're a supplements brand and you're selling vitamin C and vitamin D, go and launch vitamin B, hypothetically. But also, if you're a supplements brand that sells vitamin C, create variations within your products, and that is twofold in doing the next thing, but it's also a surefire way to boost that conversion rate. A lot of the time people click on your listing is because they think it's going to be marketed towards what they're looking for. When they get to the landing page, it's not actually the products that they want. They might click on it and it's vitamin C 60 capsules, or really they're looking for 120 capsules, or it's vitamin C for ages 65 plus, and it should be in their 40s. It's vitamin C for men, they're all blah 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 blah. If you've got a listing and a product, and underneath that you've got 60 capsules, 120 capsules, 240 capsules, some for men, some for women, you cover all bases in that regard. You get 2 variation types per listing, so play within those confines. But it's also a way to increase margin, but B, a way to increase a way to increase conversion rate, but B, a way to increase margin, just on the grounds that if you are selling 60 capsules, it goes back to what we were talking about, that low RRP piece. Whereas if you're selling 240 capsules, you will be able to price higher, you'll be able to blend out those advertising fees and blend out that fulfillment fee to a better extent, produce a more compelling offer to the consumer from a price per capsule perspective, but also be able to make a lot higher margin as well, even after the fact.
I want to talk now about the international expansion piece of growth. Is the majority of what you guys do there is kind of take US businesses and get them into the UK and Europe, or is it kind of the other way around as well?
It's both. One's a lot easier than the other, to be honest. So the US is 65 to 70% of all Amazon globally.
Wow.
And with that, there's a lot more demand, as I say, 65 to 70% globally. But there's also, therefore, it attracts a lot more supply. With that, if you can compete well in the US, you can definitely compete well in the UK and EU. Reason being, you accumulate so much more volume. So you can win on economies of scale across the supply chain, probably benefit from cheaper cost of goods relative to your UK EU counterparts because you'll be buying in higher volumes. But B, you will have accumulated more reviews on the Amazon platform by virtue of the fact that you've done more sales on the Amazon platform. The reviews is such a needle mover in the way that you rank organically on Amazon. And therefore, if you take let's take the resistance band market. If you type resistance bands into the US, the top 4 players will have 50,000 reviews plus, and maybe the odd exception. But that is the bar. That's the barrier to entry almost. In the UK, the top 5 resistance bands might have an average of 5 to 10,000 reviews, maybe 10 to 20,000 these days. But point being, it's chalk and cheese. If you take that US brand, launch it in the UK brand, it quickly propels to number 1 just because of the way Amazon's ranking algorithm works. And that's a fundamentally easier thing to do than taking your 5 to 10,000 UK listing and trying to launch it in America. Not least because of the fact that also because of those supply demand dynamics, the cost per click is remarkably higher in the US. So you do well to get a cost per click under $1.50 in the US. In the UK, that probably averages at 70p, 60p maybe. In France, you're probably looking at 30 cents, 40 cents. That might be being slightly hyperbolic in France, but that's certainly true for, say, Spain. Anyway, point being, it's so much cheaper to advertise in the UK and EU versus America, and you're coming in with a huge review base advantage. Once you've been through that administrative, slightly bureaucratic first 3 months of getting everything set up from product compliance, regulatory, and kind of VAT perspective, you've got a very nice playing field to operate within.
Okay, so would you say that the US market, for the same product between the UK and the US market can take and support a much higher price point?
Yeah, I think fundamentally price points are slightly higher in the US. It's product dependent, but consumers are willing to pay a little bit more in America. What we also find is, going back to that point on variations, is Americans love a bundle relative to Europeans. So whereas a 2-pack of anything might be a bestseller in the UK and EU, in America it quite justifiably might be an 8-pack, and it's of 8-packs that you wouldn't ever think you need 8 of something, but it seems to catch the American gaze. So I think they're definitely higher spenders. There's definitely evidence to support that claim. Yeah.
Okay. And then when you're looking at Europe, are there any kind of markets that you recommend people kind of look at?
I think maybe being slightly patriotic, the UK is a really nice sweet spot between admin, language, and kind of that supply impetus, but also the demand. So the UK is about 8 to 9% of Amazon globally, whereas the US is 65 to 70. Germany and the UK are similarly sized. Germany probably edges it in truth. But the UK shares a language with the US and is maybe slightly less bureaucratic than the EU, but to be honest, there's not an awful lot in it. And therefore, getting set up, and if it's going to be one market and one market only, I'd say for a US brand entering Europe, the UK makes sense. That said, if we are lifting the veil on it being one market, the EU makes so much more sense. I mean, there's a trade union. If you launch Germany, you can launch France, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Belgium, Poland, Czech Republic, etc., 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 all through Amazon's fulfillment network. As long as you've got your VAT numbers set up correctly, you can launch all of those. You send stock into Germany. Amazon will distribute your stock across continental Europe, basically any EU member state, and offer pick, pack, deliver to the end consumer anywhere across that trading block within the next day. So that used to include the UK, but obviously Brexit somewhat got in the way of that, which makes life harder for UK sellers. But launching Germany means, if you're willing to put that upfront legwork in on localizing all of your listings, etc., in all of those different languages and managing all of those marketplaces, from a logistics perspective, Amazon makes life really easy.